Welcome to another episode of Startup Strides. Today, my guest is Adriana from Antler. Welcome, Adriana.
Hi, thank you. I'm super excited to be here and to chat to you.
Same here. Same here. I guess my first question to you is, how are you?
I'm doing good. I mean, we were literally speaking about this right before we press record, but there seems to be a fireman in the flat next door to me. So I hope everything is okay. But it seems to be under control. But if I do look out my window and there's some, it's probably because I'm looking at some smoke out there. But you've got my
This,
undivided attention, I promise.
I also want to clarify for our audience that I'm not, she is willingly doing
Yes,
this. I'm not forcing
I'm
her.
okay. Don't worry.
uh,
Um, yeah,
Podcast is not important, more important than her safety. But
of course.
Adriana, really excited to have you on.
Yeah,
I
thank
believe
you for having me.
we were, planning to do this episode for a few weeks, couple of weeks now, really.
Yes.
Um, and I have a few questions ready, which I'm also very excited to ask. But before that, I think per tradition, it's always nice to learn about the person's background and their, history, their story in their own words. So, what are you doing now, Adriana? And how do you, end up here?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm currently the visiting analyst at Antler in their UK fund based out of London. I started in September, so I've been doing this for about 8 months now. Before that, I worked at a tech startup, specifically a crypto blockchain kind of ed tech startup, which I joined right out of university. And I went to university in London. I studied at the London School of Economics. I did history, so completely non-technical and sort of half panicked when I graduated and half wanted to get into an industry that I thought would be interesting and exciting. And so I applied for this tech startup, got into it, and did that for about a year before I moved into Antler. And then I guess a little bit about me is that I'm born and raised in London. I've always lived in London. I absolutely love it. Currently I'm in like East London, but I grew up in North, kind of North Central area, which has been nice. So super excited to be here. And yeah, chat to you a little bit more about all things startups, VC, everything like that, which is
Yeah,
always.
and one of the questions is actually about your history background,
Mhm.
but I guess before that, I want to quickly ask, you experienced both the operator side, now the more
Mm.
the VC side of things. What
Yeah.
made you consider that transition from startups to VC world?
Yeah, for sure. I think, yeah, there were a number of different things. One, I'd been at the startup for about a year, and I was super generalist with that. I did everything from like program management, like the back end kind of stuff, all the way to client and sales and BD to operations to a little bit of marketing. And I felt that after a year, I kind of got got the grasp of it, and it also was a startup that I didn't really. I mean, I'm going to put it bluntly. I don't have a deep passion for crypto, however much I wish I did. And I think when you work at a startup, it's so important to really, care about that product and the mission and what you're doing. And I just really, I enjoyed it for the most part, but I just couldn't see myself kind of going down that route. And I felt that my growth had kind of stalled. And so I was exploring other opportunities and I thought it would be really interesting to see the other side of the same coin. So I've worked at a startup. It'll be interesting to see what it's like at a fund that invests in startups. And obviously Antler is super early stage and that part interests me the most because, all the data that you have on this company is literally the founders. And so that was really exciting to me. And so I applied for the visiting analyst role and ended up getting it, which was really lucky, I guess.
hmm You're right. Passion is very important, especially in early stages, because it can be quite chaotic, and it becomes your life in a way. Where is your passion, Gianna? Besides what you're doing right now, if you were doing a startup, what would you do?
Oh my gosh, my passion. Wow. That is $1 million question. I think my fatal flaw in life is that I never really know what I want to do. And
Mhm.
so I wake up every day and I like try to learn as much as I can and like meet interesting people and do the best job that I can do. But in terms of like passion and what I see myself doing for the rest of my life, I have not figured out the answer to that question. I don't know
Mhm.
if that's just dodging it, but I genuinely like would be happy doing a lot of different things, or I think I would be. And so at this point in my life, I'm just trying to like try it all out, experience it, learn from amazing people. So then hopefully later down the line, my path kind of narrows and I know what I want to do. But at the moment, I don't know, to be completely
No,
transparent.
and I appreciate the honesty because in a way, I feel like a lot of people are in a similar position. And, you know, they say if you are too set on the destination, you might miss the scenery or in your journey, right? So,
Exactly. You got to stop and smell
um,
the flowers.
yeah, exactly. And you're doing that, which is nice. Going back
Totally.
to your history background, you studied history
Mhm.
at LSE, which is a
Yeah.
very cool subject. I mean, history is about humans. It's about behaviors. It's about shifts. It's about narratives, especially over a period of time. And some people say history is cyclical. You know, you can
Mhm.
repeat and you can predict things, which is very much in a VC world also. So I guess in one way it is not technical, and you might be like, oh, how does that relate to VC and startups? But in a way, from what I said, you can kind of draw parallels. So I'm curious, like, how do you think that background gave you an edge, or perhaps a different lens in your current day to day work?
Yes, a great question. I think you're so right about how history is centered around, or certain types of histories are centered around humans and people and their behavior and their actions, and how kind of something really small and minor, like the butterfly effect, it can have catastrophic or amazing or wild consequences that people would never really realize or dream of in that moment. And I think it's studying history really developed my kind of love and obsession with individuals and people that do, that disrupt things and do weird things and kind of change the world without actually realizing that they're doing it. And so I really enjoyed that, and just learning about different periods, also seeing, as you said, like the cyclical element and how the past kind of, you can find elements of it in the present, which I really enjoy. And I think that kind of translates to founders because, founders disrupt and they think outside the box. And so I enjoyed that. But in terms of like an edge or a different lens, like, I don't know. I think it really made me, I don't know, it gave me quite a broad view of the world. LSC, obviously, history is a very subjective subject. Like, it's not, there's no right or wrong answer. But what I quite enjoyed about the LSE history course is that it's very international. And so I got to like study lots of different histories that I never really experienced at my like GCSE or A level kind of secondary school. So I enjoyed that. But I think, yeah, like it just kind of, got like was able to help me with the qualitative side of it, with thoughts and reasonings and arguments, and how you can kind of look at two sides or seven sides of the historical debate and really form your own opinion of it, which I think a lot of VC is about, kind of forming opinions on things. Whether you think it kind of is going to be something like a moonshot or it's going to be maybe less so. So I like to think history kind of opened my mind a little bit like that. But honestly, when I like chose it, I did not expect to be right here, right now. Like,
Yeah.
I chose it just because I was like, if I'm going to spend 3 years of my life doing something, it's got to be something I enjoy. And I just really loved history from when I was a child. So I was like, I'm just going to
Mhm.
do this.
I mean, history is, I think, I studied biochemistry, so in my undergrad. But when you look at the books I read, it's very much just purely history, and it's mostly history, not purely history. But I'll
What
read like history. Look, I have literally from history of Christianity to history of neuroscience to history of neurosurgery. Even right now, I'm working through
Yes,
one,
that's
so
exciting.
it's kind of all over the place. But
Mm.
but it is a fascinating subject, and you're right. It does give you kind of a bit of a broad exposure. Is there a favorite part of history, or I guess favorite
Uh,
history for you?
Favorite part of history? That's such a good question. I did my dissertation on US Latin American relations during the Ronald Reagan era. And do
Oh.
you know what the, yeah, correct face to pull, the Iran Contra affair and how the US sold arms illegally to Iran to fund paramilitary groups in Nicaragua? Well, I basically,
Sardinistas? Or is it
Sandinistas. Yes, well, the
Sandinistas?
Sandinistas were in government. It was the
Yeah.
Contras who were the
Contrast.
ones fighting
Yeah.
against. But I basically wrote how a lot of that money was actually, well, some of that money was siphoned off to like drug lords in the area, which meant that they were able to actually, increase the amount of cocaine that was being sent up to the US. And in the 80s, they also had the crack epidemic. And so I kind of like weighed those sides and kind of brought how basically linked how the Iran Contra affair impacted America's war on drugs in the 80s. And that to me was like fascinating because I just love kind of going into like those CIA kind of like FBI stuff. Which is funny because I absolutely hate true crime and I cannot do it because I don't do anything
Really?
for it. No, no, it absolutely terrifies me. But historical stuff that's more like political, I find quite interesting. But in terms of like favorite history, I really enjoyed studying Napoleon
Mm,
and his kind of impact on Europe, which I really enjoyed. Latin American history more broadly, with all the kind of dictatorships and military revolutions, and also like the people and how they thought and how like that kind of area in the 20th century was cool. And then I did a course in the Enlightenment, which was really hard because you have to think a lot because they thought a lot back then. I enjoyed that too. But I try to kind of keep it as broad as I possibly can. Uh, so yeah.
Napoleon. I mean, first of all, don't ask what your favorite banana company was doing during the 70s and 80s in Latin America.
God, there's so
Uh,
many.
we don't want to talk about that. And Napoleon is interesting actually. I think uh, I'm not trying to tie everything back to BC, but I think it's like one man changing the course of kind of history in a way. So it's like a one
Yeah.
man. Um, but it is one thing you mentioned. I think you said history is also about like strong opinions. Do you
Mm.
think you're prone to forming strong opinions?
Um, that's a good question. I try at Antler, we have this saying, which is definitely not unique to Antler, is strong opinions loosely held. So everyone like, we're like it's super encouraging to have strong opinions about things because obviously that's a key part of like VC in this world where things are really changing. You should also be super open-minded to have your opinion swayed by someone who maybe has better evidence or can argue better than you or whatever. And I think history is very much like that. You can go into a historical period or look at a historical person and be like, they were awful, they had no idea what they were doing, like absolutely awful person. But then you can also kind of look at it and be like, yeah, that's true, but they also had this element to them and this, and like maybe it's rooted in this. And you can't I try not to view things too black and white.
Hmm.
I think a lot of history and I think a lot of like the world is in this gray matter. But in terms of me, strong opinions, I don't think so. I think I am
Mm.
very easily persuaded, which might not be a good thing. But I do like try to but I think my thing is that I never wanna form an opinion before I have all the facts, but it's really get all the facts on some big, big, like, decisions in life. So I try to kinda get as much information as I can and make up my own mind from that.
That's interesting. I mean, I guess that's a nice segue into my next question, which is, you have to be persuaded, sometimes very little evidence by just exceptional founders, when you don't have the full picture. And speaking of exceptional founders, I mean, Antler is very much focused on finding those, and very often pre-company, pre-revenue, pre-product. Um, but what is an exceptional founder? And is there a singular definition of an exceptional founder?
I love this question. When I was interviewing for this role, one of the investment team, I asked this question. I was like, "What do you guys look for? Like, what is your perfect founder?" And he was like, "There is no archetype of a perfect founder because it changes all the time. It changes for who they are, what they're building, what market they're going into, like who their co-founder is. Like all of these things can be really kind of can sway what you view as a good founder or not." But I think at Antler, there are a few kind of key traits that we always look for and that I've kind of noticed coming out of the founders that I've had the privilege of working with. But I think like um to name a few is like relentlessness and velocity, like the willingness to work really, really hard, but in the correct direction, which is kind of like we use the term velocity for that. The One of the partners has this thing of like killer instinct. Like, are they going to be the ones to like out hustle everyone, figure out what the problem is, and figure out what the solution is? Another one of our principles really likes people who are obsessed with the problem space, less about the solution, and are just so obsessed with figuring out the problem, like figuring out the solution to this one problem, and they're just obsessed with that. Or magnetism and kind of charm and charisma, because as a founder, especially like when when we're looking at so early stage, as a founder, you're going to have to like sell yourself to a co-founder if you're looking for one, to customers, to advisors, to VCs, to your employees when you hire them. And so that charisma and that ability to talk and command a room is something that we always kind of like to see. And then something which is probably my favorite one that we look for is like iconoclasts, like kind of weirdos, quote unquote, or like people who don't really fit into the box of life, who do something kind of crazy, who kind of think a little bit differently, who view things from a different perspective. And I think all of those things we kind of like take into account, plus every team member when they're interviewing, when they're talking to founders, approach this question differently and kind of bring in their kind of background and what they've done in the past and the founders that they've worked with, and kind of use that to apply to whether they think a founder is going to be exceptional. And then also like you can think a founder is going to be the most incredible, amazing founder ever, but then they just might not be. And then the reverse, like sometimes you have someone that you're like, oh, I'm not sure, and it takes you a little while to kind of see it. And then when you see it, you're like, yes, this is it. I see the vision. So yeah, it's a super broad question, but one that I really enjoy seeing what they are.
Which one do you think is worse? Missing investing in the founders that looked very exceptional, but turns out wasn't, or missing the ones that didn't look the part but ended up building the most,
Missing the one. We would
missing the
like
one.
that's the whole game of VC. You could invest in 99 companies that are like kind of fine or rubbish or whatever,
Yeah.
but invest in that one,
Oh,
then then that's it. Then
okay.
you're golden. But if you miss that one, then all the 99, like none of that matters, you know?
Uh, yeah.
So that's why, I mean, I think, yeah, like a lot of VCs have like by consensus or conviction, but at least one partner, like in our kind of model, at least one partner needs to be like kind of rooting for you as a founder. And then we'll just say it's a yes. I mean, that's very like broad, but it's always better to say yes than it is to say no, kind of broadly
Mm.
speaking.
So do you believe in? I mean, I guess the philosophy is more like a consensus driven, or is it if like one partner like strongly believes as his founder and
I
is a good
mean, we
founder?
we see both consensus
It
and
says.
conviction, and I
Uh-huh.
think I read an article, I can't remember who wrote it, about, like, the kind of, split between consensus investing and conviction investing, but it's really interesting because at Antler, we work with the founders for 8 weeks because we have this residency model, and so during that 8 weeks, like, a founder has a really strong coach and someone that they work really kind of closely with on the investment team, and that person obviously is, like, super rooting for them, otherwise they wouldn't be their coach. Then you can get to investment committee and like some of the other members of the investment team are like, okay, is this person like, do I see it? Are we just going with consent? Like, it's very interesting how that interplays. And we definitely see both where it's like a unanimous yes, like we're 100% going to like back this, or we have one partner like championing them and then going
Mm.
for that. Yeah, you see a broad range.
Adriana, I hear this quite a lot, especially with roles like a traumatized founder, this, the
Yeah.
psychologically damaged founder, like the, um, and how important, like, what do you think of that?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think you need to have had a like, I don't think you have to have had a traumatic childhood to be a billion-dollar founder. I don't think you have to. But I think there's something to be said for people that don't have a safety net or don't have something th that they can fall back on, and this is it, and this is all they are going for, and they're gonna run into every single spike until they find like, until they get through it. Um I don't know if that helps, but that's kind of my perspective. I can't really I can't really speak on either
That's
side.
fair. And I guess from what you said, one thing I'm curious about, do you think which one is do you think is more important, especially now, founder market fit or product market fit?
I think for us at Antler, we always back the jockey, not the horse. So for us, I would say the founder. But obviously, if they're building a product in a market that is not big enough for VC scale returns, or a market that is extremely hard to kind of get into, and also I feel like the two are kind of intertwined because if a founder doesn't have like the correct founder will build the correct product for the correct market, if you know what I mean, like
Mm, mm,
correct
yeah.
kind of black and white, but I feel like they will know what they're building is right. Whereas I feel like if they're building the wrong product, then maybe that's not the right founder. I don't
Wow,
know.
this is actually, yeah,
Yeah.
this is
Maybe.
very this is very first person. I mean, it's in a way. I don't know why I didn't think about it. You're right. Like if it's the right founders, they'll build the right product for the right market too. Yeah, you're right.
Hopefully. You
Um,
would think.
you
Hopefully.
know, it's like um, obviously pivots happen, which is a natural part of the
Mm.
early stage journey. Which I guess the right founder will do the right pivots at the right time. Speaking of kind of helping, you said Antler has this 8-week program, right? When VCs back founders, different people imagine different kind of additional support. Some VCs believe in hands-off support, kind of leaving it to the founder to kind of do the rest. Some people believe in hands-on support. Some people believe in the mix of it. I guess beyond capital, how do you seeing? I guess how do you guys do it at Antler, supporting this ambitious individuals from going this, you know, to becoming a real company builder?
Yeah. Um, so I think we really try to kind of match the founder and what they want and what they need from us. I think something that I absolutely love about the Antler and the team that I'm really lucky to work with at Antler is that we never assume that we know it. And so one of our key kind of superpowers as a company, I think, is that we're able to put founders, connect them with the people that do know what they're doing. Like, not saying that we don't know what we're doing, but we're not domain expertise. Like we're sector agnostic. Founders have many, many different needs, and we're able to support to the best of our ability. But we're also able to put them in contact with people that can support even better. Um, and so I think that's one thing that I've really enjoyed kind of seeing how that works. But I think more like hands-on in the residency that when we work with the founders, I think we try to balance like supporting groups of founders. So like in the residency, the cohort that they're part of, with it like supporting individual founders with what they need. So we run like sessions and kind of bring in speakers and for that communal element, because a lot of the like a key part of supporting founders is making sure that they also support each other. Like the community aspect we find is like a major thing at Antler, and it's something that I'm so excited to be a part of because I see these founders like in this community, like backing each other, like working together. Like it's so hard building a company, and if you're doing it in a room with 70 other people also doing it, it kind of eases it a little bit, I would say, or at least makes it like this much more fun. Um, and then on the other hand, we also kind of read the room and see what people are building because obviously every residency is changing. We're always learning new things. We're always trying to iterate and improve on our processes. And we also get different founders in every residency. So, for example, in this residency, we had a lot of founders kind of looking at building companies in the robotics and physical AI space. So, one of them knew a robotics company and then they brought in like a humanoid and a quadruped. I cannot pronounce that word, but like ones that look like dogs, and they brought them in, and then they like spoke about it, and like we literally had a humanoid in the office, which was so cool. So like there's that where we're kind of reading the room and trying to figure it out, and then also kind of once we invest in them, post investment support has a lot of different elements, like all the way from fundraising to hiring to co-founder relationships and kind of supporting that as we can. And then for that, we also draw a lot on our kind of strong network and people that we know as much as we can.
That's really cool. Um, Community building has become a very important part of VC stuff
Mm.
lately. I mean, you see a lot of dinners, you see a lot of hackathons, um, and other things too. Why do you think, one, it has become such an important thing, and two, how do you think of community yourself? Like, what's your take on this community building aspect of VC?
Um, I think community is always, I mean, this is going to be really simplistic, but I think community is just nice. And it's nice being in a room with people that are doing kind of similar things to you, that are navigating this industry with you, that are like, yeah, like that are just kind of your peers. And also, I kind of, to be very kind of cynical, maybe more transactional, not that relationships should be that at all, but VC is a very kind of people driven industry and very like network heavy. And that is honestly can be a massive superpower to people is having like connections and people that they can go to ask questions or for support and vice versa, obviously. not to say that I'm advocating for transactional relationships. I think you should build organic, natural relationships because those are always the most magical and most fun. And so I think community can really kind of play on that and help build those relationships out of that kind of just transactional, I met you once, like, can I ask for this favor? And then I'll return that favor and so forth. Like if you go to events or dinners and things like that, you can have conversation that is a little bit deeper. And community is one of the things like I've really enjoyed at Antler. I've helped with a few of our communities that we run. So we have our Antler Next Gen community, which is like operators and builders at VC-backed startups. We do like fireside chats and panels with them, and they're people that we think could be exceptional founders, like someday in the future when they decide to found. So we kind of work with them, and then we also one of my personal favorites, which is my little kind of not to say pet project because that demeans it, but like something that I've worked at Antler is our junior VC community, which is our community of analysts and associates who have just broken into venture capital. Like they're kind of figuring out their career path within that. And that to me has been one of my favorite things I've done at Antler. I've met some incredible people through that. I've helped do the events, like organize it, stuff like that. And I'm a very operationally minded person. So I absolutely love that. And honestly, like meeting people through those events, I think has been great. So I'm all for the community aspect. I think it's just a really nice and fun thing to be involved in as much as you can.
It takes a village, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Um, yeah. Um, one thing I am curious about, though, I think, uh, I mean, there's a bit of that's that happens everywhere, but I think in VC, sometimes you might run into this bit of echo chambers, right? Like you, bit of a, we talked about this different personas, right? Like there's a certain archetype of looking in the part to be backed, but I feel like that eventually ends up becoming sort of a consensus that looking
Yeah,
different, looking the part, which creates conformity, which might actually make
yes,
you miss the outliers. So
exactly.
and I feel like when you think about it, when you think of YC, for example, there's a certain archetype that comes to my mind too. You know what I mean? Um, how do you guys, and how do you personally, guys, try to avoid those biases when evaluating founders, when selecting people?
I think that's a very, very important question. And I think something that we as a team are always constantly talking about and iterating on. And I think especially David, one of our investment team, he leads on our scouting strategy. So this is always like front of mind for him. But I think he also runs social mobility ventures, which is about empowering stay educated founders and operators and investors like in the ecosystem. So he's really kind of conscious about that element and kind of making sure that we check our biases on that front because obviously like there are certain buzzwords that you can hear or you can see on a CV that make you think, oh my gosh, like this is going to be that person. But then also sometimes that happens, but then you have a call with them and you're like, oh, maybe this doesn't match up. So it's kind of being aware of that. But like I said, like we constantly calibrate on what our version of good looks like for a founder. But I would say for me personally, what I'm trying to do this early on in my career and like kind of this very still quite new to venture capital and the world of founders um, is to try to listen to as many perspectives as possible from people who've been doing it a lot longer than me and have literally had firsthand experience building a company or working at a unicorn or any of these kind of skills or elements that I think are really key to kind of helping you hone your founder instinct. And I also try to be as open minded as possible. So something for me, which was one of my kind of, I would say, like biases that I had to check was don't even know if this is the correct bias, but for like likability and like I know I mentioned it like how we always look for charisma and magnetism, but obviously that has to be with conjunction with other kind of elements. But like for example, for me, like at the start, I would find it really hard to kind of see the difference between a really likable founder and someone that I enjoyed spending time with and having a conversation with versus them actually being a good founder. Um, so like you could have a wonderful person that's amazing, but they might not be a killer founder. And also
Yeah.
vice versa. There might be someone that you don't really get along with, but they have that killer instinct and you've got to kind of like, be aware of that. Um, And so I think, yeah, biases in the VC investor like ecosystem, I think is something that definitely exists, and I think it's good to have those conversations about it, and we try to keep that as open minded and kind of like front of mind in Antler as possible, so that we always, I mean, I know this is so cliche, but try to check our biases when we're talking to people. And also the good thing is that our team is super like diverse, and they've all had different backgrounds and experiences, and no founder only interacts with one person on the team. We get a lot of
Mhm.
different they interact with a lot of different people in the team. So we have a lot of different kind of opinions and conversations that we can really kind of use when we're, I guess, like assessing or deciding whether we're going to invest in a founder.
Is there a way you do, because when you're exposed to so many different things and so many different perspectives, I feel like you can also be exposed to quite a bit of noise. Is there a way you can filter out noise? Do you have any techniques?
Mm, Um, I guess one thing that helps us is so like I mentioned, every founder or every kind of team gets a coach that they work with, and that coach knows that team very well. And so sometimes there are like conversations that other members of the team have, or like other kind of snippets and things that maybe are taken out of context and might not be super representative and might be that kind of noise. And so when we sit and we discuss in our meetings together, the coach can kind of help calibrate on that element, which is quite good. Um, but in terms of, yeah, separating out signal from noise, we like, I mean, it's a different thing. It's obviously one thing when you're like building a company and like deciding what kind of elements to really go down, and another thing when you're assessing founders and deciding which element to go down. And that's something that I'm still trying to kind of figure out on on my end too.
Fair enough. Um, I guess speaking of noise, another thing is, because building has become so mainstream and investing, I guess, too, um, founders have become better storytellers,
Mm.
and I think especially at that early stage, most of it is really the storytelling. It's how you sell your vision, how you sell your idea. But um, with a lot of people becoming better and better at storytelling, um, I feel like it might become a bit difficult to distinguish: is this a good idea, or is this just somebody who's building a really good narrative about around a
Yeah.
decentish idea? And I guess, how do you think of it, and how do you approach it?
Yeah. I think that's a really good question. One thing that I think really helps us at Antler is that we spend 8 weeks with that team. So the pitch and the story that they tell in the IC, in the investment committee, we've kind of seen the 8 weeks it took to get there, and we've probably, like, supported them on that journey. So, I think when you're in the same office with them and you're sitting next to them and you're working with them through their pivots and their co-founder dynamics, often all the breakups and makeups and switcheroos that happen, it kind of helps build a level of trust that you have between the investor and the founder. And I think one thing that which is my role, so I'm a non like I'm more on the kind of founder experience side at Antler, and that side means like I don't have a vote in the investment committee, so I'm kind of a non-partial person. As much as I can be. Obviously, I like, work for Antler, but like I'm someone that can kind of be there for the founders when they want to just have someone just hear them out. And so we really try to kind of build and maintain that trust between ourselves and the founder throughout the kind of 8 week residency. And so like so there's that part where we kind of have that background to the story that they're telling, which maybe some investors, when the founders just come in for the investment committee, that might kind of be a little bit less kind of contextual and that side, or we have that kind of background. And also like at our stage, we are backing talent and we are backing the founder. So if they're amazing at convincing us and we can be convinced, which also is not the easiest thing, then maybe that does actually show some outlierness, and maybe that does actually show something that could go somewhere. Um, and then I think the final note on that kind of like kind of seeing whether it's just kind of whether it's just smoke and mirrors or if there's something kind of behind it is as a kind of generalist sector agnostic fund, we bring in externals into our investment committees. So those who have more domain knowledge as investors in the space, than we do. And it's really interesting hearing their perspective and hearing them ask questions to the founders. So then it gives us that kind of context that we maybe haven't had as much when we've been working with them for 8 weeks.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's fair. And speaking of, outlier founders, and you studied history, right? We mentioned that Napoleon maybe
Yeah.
might be one of those few individuals that managed to change, have an outlier effect on course of history in a way.
Yeah.
But very often people say, there's no such thing as one man effect. It's usually the timing, incentives, contingency, right
Yeah.
environment, and all that, right? Um, but VC, I feel like, is built on an opposite premise of, if you back the right outlier founders, they can have a disproportional effect on the market. How do you think of that? Do you think it is true, or do you think VCs can over romanticize the idea of this outlier founder?
Yes. Interesting question. I think firstly, like on the history side, I mean, it could totally be argued that like most of history is just someone waking up one day and deciding to do something out of the ordinary, and then it just has kind of consequences afterwards. Obviously that's super reductionist and like definitely not 100% true, but it's interesting. So even those kind of just like amazing, exceptional men that people or and women that people talk about are just also humans at the end of the day. Like, Napoleon, military genius, as people say, and then did all these kind of weird and wonderful things all around Europe. But he also was like, a man that was like deep in love with his wife that cheated on him multiple times. So like, you know,
Way too in love, way too in love.
way too in love. Have you read his letters?
It's
It's
very
so
embarrassing,
good.
but that
It's
makes me feel better about myself. That's for sure.
fair. But like, there's that. There's a guy that can go and decide that he's gonna invade Russia, which didn't end very well, but and have all of that and still be writing like soppy love letters to someone. So like
Simping for his.
maybe. And so I think like you've got to kind of really put the human behind the person in history a lot. And that's something that I really kind of really enjoyed doing when I was like studying them and like kind of really getting deeper into who they are. And so I think back to like BC and like the great man theory and like kind of like yeah, all of this like backing you it's so true. Like you really one incredible, amazing, brilliant individual can have like unheard of consequences on the world and what they're building and on the market and all of this. So I don't think VC like over romanticizes founders. And it would be super kind of hypocritical of me to say that when I work at and I believe in the whole like founder first theory and that a company is made or broken by the founders, especially at early stage. But I think like, yeah, like maybe there's everything else. You do have to kind of put it into a little bit of context, but like founders are pretty much like almost everything, I would say. But obviously, like within reason.
Fair enough. And then, are there any, you're exposed to so many founders, so many ideas, so many communities. Are there anything that is really exciting to you right now that you're really, I guess, passionate about?
Yeah, well, great question. I think something that I'm really excited about, I mean, and this goes back to like junior VC stuff, is like the people that are gonna be the next
Mm,
wave of kind of investors and kind of people building in the well, building on the investor side, kind of like building this ecosystem. Because I think VC, it's really helpful, like I said, to get all those different perspectives and bringing young, kind of like fresh minds into it. I think really, really important. And I'm super like I'm a super strong advocate of like supporting and helping people getting into VC because I know obviously it can be quite an intense uphill battle sometimes. Um, but I think so something I'm really excited about is the next wave of kind of
next week.
principals and partners and people kind of getting to that level because I've had the privilege of working with and chatting to and speaking to and meeting some amazing analysts and associates and people kind of early on in their careers. So I'm super excited to kind of see where that goes. But then in terms of like industries and products and things that founders are building, like I like there's just so much. There's so much people are thinking of, and it's sometimes like you can think, oh, like I think that's going to be something cool, and then you talk to a founder, and you're like, wait, actually, I didn't even think about that perspective. That's a completely different way of looking at it, and then you're just like, so it can be a little bit overwhelming sometimes on that.
And when you think about this next wave of VCs, this junior VCs, is there any archetypes that stands out to you?
Oh, an archetype, an investor rather than a founder.
Yeah,
Great question.
full of them today somehow.
No. Again, I think to be an amazing investor is a whole separate, like, conversation to have, and one that I'm still kind of, like, figuring out myself, where what that kind of looks like. But I think at early stage, which is what I can speak to, or can try and speak to, I think that founder empathy is, like, really interesting, and I think can make kind of quite a special investor, when they kind of understand the founder and who they are and what they're doing and how they fit into this journey. And then also like there's a classic like I think I think a lot of conversations that I have with like the people that I meet in this community and other events that I go to is that like VC can be like an all consuming industry. Like you're constantly like, I'm missing out on the next big thing. I need to talk to this founder, like going to events, doing all this stuff. And like there's this like I mean, it's a classic kind of thing, but there's this fear of missing out and there's this greed to kind of get the best founders that everyone else is like kind of getting at. Um and so I guess like it's interesting to kind of see whether maybe those that are more kind of I intertwined with that kind of web make the most out of it and kind of really utilize that, or whether it's interesting to see people who have a little bit more kind of different perspective and different backgrounds and things like that. Like, you know, a lot of people have many different paths into and out of VC and then going back in or working your way up from like an analyst all the way up to partner is also a kind of way to do it. So I guess in terms of an archetype, no. Something that I think is important is that founder empathy. But also there are so many other elements, like if you work at a, you know, like if you work at a sector specific fund or if you invest at later stage, like all these different things, there's so much. And I think the best investors kind of mold into that or kind of break away from it too. So I guess either or.
Well, hopefully I will have another episode in a couple of years or maybe a year down the line, and you kind of give me your more kind of
Sweet.
different
Yeah.
perspective on VC archetype. And um, I guess my final question to you, I can't even believe we managed to come to the end of the episode. I've been really enjoying this episode, this conversation.
Same.
I guess my final question to you would be a bit of a switcher. You know, we talked about the opinions you formed since joining Antler, but I'm also curious about the opinions you've significantly changed since joining Antler, and can be about anything.
Well, that's such a good question. I think one thing that I can definitely like has definitely changed is I originally thought venture capital was a glamorous finance bro's dream, which maybe it is, and some elements definitely are. And maybe that's more like if you go down a later stage or work at like kind of a kind of more, yeah, like that kind of side to it where it's a lot more kind of financial and modeling and all of that. Because I went to LSE and LSE can be quite a corporate minded
Yeah.
university and like all these finance bros would be like, yeah, like I'm going to get into private equity, like all of this. And I was like, great, like that's great for you. And none of that means anything to me. And so I think it's so funny that I'm like working in an industry that like I did not even remotely consider 2 years ago at all. Um, and so I think when I started, like obviously I like had interviewed and like I knew what Antler was and I knew that it was obviously different to like that kind of vision that I had in my head. But I think I definitely kind of like thought it was going to be more kind of on that side. And I don't know, I didn't expect to just find it as fun as I expect, like as I do. I think it's so exciting, like waking up every day and being like, oh my gosh, like what conversations am I going to have today? Tell me something that's going to like make my head spin like round and I'm going to be like thinking about it for days or like all those different things. Cause that's like, that was probably the main thing about VC that changed a lot. And also to realize that not that other investors aren't finance bros as well. I mean, you all
Mm,
them, and there's nothing wrong with like, I'm not, like, saying anything bad about that. I'm just saying, like, that's the type that I did not this is a world I did not expect myself to kind of get into. And so that's something that I've just really kind of changed my mind. I've been like, "Oh, wow, like, there are so many archetypes of investors out there." And then on the founder element, like, I didn't even have that many thoughts when I came in about founders. I was just like, I want to learn as much as I possibly can about them. And so I think, yeah, like one thing that probably has stayed the same throughout when I kind of went in was how strong, like, like how important the founder is when you're in all these discussions and all these like company building, investing, like all of that, how like critical the founder is to that. That's one thing that I would say has changed and has definitely stayed the same.
Adriana, really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you
your
so much for
thoughts,
having me.
for your opinions, and for your time.
Thank you. Thank you too. It was an absolute pleasure.